Welcome to Royal History UK, where the past comes alive.
Welcome to this explainer. I want you to jump back with me to the year 1066. In a flash, a violent, highly coordinated invasion fundamentally transformed the island of Britain. And the wild thing is, over the next few centuries, that completely conquered nation would grow to transform the entire world, right before dramatically losing its vast global empire.
You've definitely heard this one before. The sun never sets on the British Empire. For more than 3 centuries, that proud boast completely defined British global dominance. But today, we're going to flip that script. We're going to uncover exactly how this absolutely unprecedented empire finally saw its sunset. And before we get there, we'll look at how the English nation at the heart of it all was so violently forged in the first place.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're breaking this down into 5 key chapters: the invasion of 1066, the Norman legacy, the cost of empire, the push for freedom, and finally, Britain's modern echoes.
All right, let's dive right into part 1, the invasion of 1066 and the succession crisis that started it all.
It all kicks off with a massive succession crisis. King Edward dies without an heir. Harold Godwinson takes the English crown, but across the water, William of Normandy says, "No way, that's actually mine." By September of 1066, William gathers thousands of soldiers and crosses the English Channel. Meanwhile, Harold's exhausted troops are forced to march hundreds of miles south to meet them. This whole thing climaxes at the famous Battle of Hastings on October 14th. After hours of totally brutal shield wall-breaking combat, Harold is killed. William secures the ultimate victory, and this wraps up with a Christmas Day coronation that literally ends Anglo-Saxon England forever.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Norman legacy and the conqueror's blueprint. So how do you actually hold on to a country you just violently conquered? Well, William introduced a brilliantly strict top-down feudal system. Think of it like a pyramid of power. The king claimed ownership of all the land and then handed parcels of it out to his loyal nobles. In return, those nobles owed him total military service. It was a masterclass in strict control that permanently centralized William's power and completely rewired the social fabric of the country.
William practically put his new kingdom under lock and key. He used physical might and some serious, unprecedented bureaucracy. The Normans went on a building spree, throwing up massive stone castles across the landscape, including the legendary Tower of London, just to intimidate and control the locals. But in 1086, he goes a step further and commissions the Domesday Book. This was a massive, highly detailed survey of absolutely all land and wealth, designed solely to maximize tax collection. A quick fun fact here, ordinary folks actually nicknamed it Domesday because its decisions on your property were as final and completely unalterable as Judgment Day.
Now, the Norman conquest didn't just change laws and architecture. It actually changed the very words coming out of people's mouths. Almost overnight, you have this stark linguistic divide. The royal court and the new nobility are all speaking French, while the ordinary people down the road are still speaking Old English. But these languages didn't stay in their separate corners forever. Over centuries, this intense cultural clash blended together, creating the exact foundation of the modern English language we're using to communicate right now.
Which brings us to Section 3, the cost of empire and the heavy weight of the 20th century. Let's fast forward over 800 years. That exact same nation, forged by a single invasion, had morphed into the largest empire in human history. I want you to really think about this scale. At its absolute peak, Britain ruled nearly a quarter of the world's landmass and a quarter of its population. That is 1 in 4 people on Earth. It was an absolute logistical and financial behemoth, which makes the sheer scale of its impending collapse all the more dramatic.
To put it into perspective, before the World Wars, Britain was constantly expanding. It was incredibly wealthy and undeniably the strongest nation on the planet. But the 20th century fundamentally changed the math. Millions went off to fight overseas, critical industries were severely weakened, and entire cities were just reduced to rubble. So while Britain technically emerged victorious from both global conflicts, the reality was staggering national debt. Attempting to control distant, far-off colonies was suddenly completely unaffordable. And that sets the stage perfectly for Section 4, the push for freedom and the winds of change.
So you have Britain's sudden financial ruin colliding head-on with rising global movements. It wasn't just one isolated thing that brought the empire down, it was a perfect storm. The world wars absolutely crushed them economically. At the exact same time, independence movements inside the colonies were fiercely demanding self-governance, and international politics were shifting fast. You had the US and the USSR actively opposing colonial empires, plus the newly formed United Nations heavily promoting the right of self-determination across the globe.
All of these forces were just squeezing the British Empire simultaneously. All of this intense pressure finally breaks the dam in 1947 when India gains its independence. This was achieved after years and years of intense political struggle, led by iconic figures like Mahatma Gandhi. And India's freedom served as a massive domino in global history. It proved beyond a doubt that freedom was entirely possible, and it deeply inspired other colonies across Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and the Middle East to fight for and achieve their own sovereignty in the decades that followed. As the physical empire rapidly shrank, Britain was completely forced to rethink and adapt its relationships with these newly independent countries, and this led to the creation of the Commonwealth. Instead of ruling from the top down, the Commonwealth connects many of these former territories through voluntary cooperation, focusing heavily on shared trade and diplomacy. It was a massive pivot from being an imperial ruler to operating as a decentralized global partner.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Britain's modern echoes and its indelible mark on the world.
The fascinating thing is, even though the physical empire disappeared, its underlying systems absolutely survived. They left permanent footprints all over the globe. The legacy of that 1066 cultural clash gave us an English language that is now spoken worldwide. Plus, dozens of independent countries still use legal and parliamentary systems that were directly modeled after Britain's. And those historical ties, they still endure today across global education, culture, and massive international institutions. The empire itself is gone, but its impact is quite literally everywhere.
To wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this provocative thought. We've just seen how incredibly fast everything can change. A powerful nation can be forged by a single, unexpected invasion, and an empire that controlled a quarter of the earth can be almost entirely dissolved in just a few short decades thanks to debt and a unified push for freedom. History proves to us over and over that global power is incredibly fragile. So, when we look around at our modern world, we have to ask ourselves, what political, economic, or social forces are silently rising or falling, shaping the superpowers of our world right now? Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep